If you live in the DC area, you've probably been to one or two Smithsonian museums. Let's be real, probably only when visitors come to town. But here's a chance to explore a side of the Smithsonian that you haven't seen on a rainy day or school field trip. Side Door, the podcast from the Smithsonian, will sneak you behind the scenes of the nation's largest museum and research complex for stories of history, science, art, and culture you won't find in the display case. You'll hear about the ghosts that supposedly haunt the halls of the museum after dark, the puzzling sex lives of giant pandas, and what it's like to run a marathon in space. You can listen to Sidedoor wherever you get your podcasts, or find it online at si.edu/sidedoor. Here's what DC is talking about. The House Oversight Committee voted Wednesday to block DC's police discipline and accountability bill. It was part of a larger hearing they say was all about stopping crime in DC, but it didn't really feel that way. Audio producer Julia Caron and CityCast DC contributor Dan Reed are here to chat about it, plus the recent boom in traffic congestion and why DC smelled like smoke earlier this week. Today is Friday, March 31st. I'm Bridget Todd, and this is CityCast DC. So the first thing on the docket is that House hearing that happened on Wednesday. Julia, take it away.
All right, so tomorrow is April Fool's Day, and it felt like one big April Fool's joke to me, this entire hearing. Let's back up a bit. So the House is calling this particular hearing Overdue Oversight of the Capital City, Part 1. The reason for this hearing is that the House Oversight Committee wanted to take a look into DC's Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act. This is a bill that was passed by emergency vote in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing protests and everything around that. Basically, it looks to hold police more accountable in their actions. It includes things like prohibiting neck restraints and wearing body-worn cameras, like stuff that has passed in other jurisdictions with some pushback, but not as much pushback as we're getting here. Obviously, like both sides of the aisle have things to say about this. The police union and most Republicans say that this bill is anti-police, that it means that they can't do their jobs, things of that nature. And supporters of the bill say, this provides transparency and accountability and means that, police can actually interact with their community and be like, yeah, we messed up in this endeavor. We're going to do better in the future. So that was the goal of this bill. MPD is facing a lot of scrutiny right now. Metro Police is down to 3,300 officers now. That's less than the 3,800 or so that they had in 2019 and 2020. Basically, they know that hiring is a big problem. Gregory Pemberton, who's the head of the police union, has said that this is a problem, and this bill also was going to make things worse. I don't know if that's true or not, but remains to be seen. Rand Paul's staffer was attacked in broad daylight. So this hearing comes at a time where all eyes are kind of on crime in the district. The people who were at this hearing, who were in front of this committee, were Bill Mendelson, Rep. Charles Allen, who's the guy who shepherded this bill through the first time, CFO Glenn Lee of the city, who kind of sat there and didn't get a lot of questions about the city's finances, which I thought was very interesting. He got a couple, but not a lot, and Pemberton. So all of these people showed up on Wednesday. They went to this hearing, and what did this hearing devolve into? A lot of posturing and peacocking and BS over should DC be a state, and actually crime is really bad, and why can't you do these things that you can do, supposedly. There's a great tweet from Martin Ostermule, who you should follow his stuff for cataloging this entire hearing, and he basically said, so far in this hearing, Republican members have called DC schools inmate factories, said DC wants to charge people up to 25 years old as minors, which is not true, said crime is higher than ever, not true, and asked about the revised criminal code that previously the House overturned. So all this to say, what do you guys think about this hearing? Mayor Bowser is supposed to be at her own specialty hearing on May 16th. So obviously we'll be covering that. But what did you guys think of this hearing? Did you watch it? What were your reactions? Do you have thoughts and feelings?
I didn't watch it, but it's definitely reminiscent of the, I don't want to say contempt that I think some Republican leaders have for urban places, not just, whether it's national Republicans talking about DC, but this happened on a smaller scale in Maryland between the former Republican governor, Larry Hogan, and the mayor of Baltimore after the uprising for Freddie Gray in 2015, right? There was a tremendous amount of condescension about, well, you can't run your city because look what happened, right? And it is often just for political points.
Yeah, I completely agree. I didn't watch it either because I knew exactly what Dan just said we were going to see lots of. And I agree. I think it's part of a larger trend that we see when it comes to disrespect that elected officials sometimes show for cities. And I think particularly that through line of like, you can't run your cities. That to me is always so deeply racially coded. I pick up on that as like a dog, or barely even a dog whistle right away. And I think when we talk about things like crime, the reality is, if you look at a lot of rural areas, red states, places like that, we so deeply associate crime with cities, despite the fact that the numbers don't often bear that out. And so another thing that really sticks out at me about this hearing is how blatant lies were allowed to be on the agenda, that you could get up in front of people as an elected official and say things that are just flat out not true, things that have no truth to them, and no one will be like, wait a minute, that's complete BS. And so, yeah, I think it goes back to what Dan was saying, this overall lack of respect and denigration of urban places, oftentimes in a way that is clearly racially coded.
So one thing that I also thought was, so I watched this hearing, and our lead producer Priyanka can tell you every 5 seconds there was a or like I wanted to throw something because it was like going back and forth between things that like clearly, people were saying about the city that like were either not true or stuff that DC could do if it was a state or if it could manage its police in a similar way that the state can. There was a report that came out from the Washington Post that said there's a more nuanced picture when it actually comes to crime in the district. It's still experiencing a rising number of homicides and carjackings compared to the last number of decades, with homicides on track to surpass 200 killings for the third consecutive year and carjackings outpacing even last year's surge. But while one Republican lawmaker called D.C., quote, the least safe it has ever been, unquote, overall killings remain far lower than what the city saw in the early 90s. Overall violent crime has similarly fallen since 2015, while gun-involved crime has increased. So this is a debate where, like, if you actually want to go there and debate, like, okay, like, crime is a problem to a certain extent. Here is what is happening. Let's have a good faith argument about figuring out solutions. Yes, I am all for that. Like, let's figure out, okay, what is it about is it something about the criminal code that lets people do this? Is it something about the way police do their jobs that allow people to have crime and police? Like, is it something about like people being able to have access to guns? Like, if it's a good faith argument, I am willing to hear it. But making this argument and having it not be in good faith, to me, is what is most frustrating about this, because it feels like it's just like, yes, we're scoring points when like this affects actual people's lives. Like this affects our everyday lives living in the city.
Yeah, I'm with you. If people are down to talk real solutions in a meaningful way that is based on reality, I think we should have that conversation. I'm completely over conversations that just use it as a way to score political points and posture. I don't feel like we see similar things in other places. Like, where was all the breathless conversation about the rural crime, the rural rise in violent crime in 2022? It's just so clear to me that this is an issue where people are interested in scoring points, not actually coming to the table and talking about real solutions that are going to impact actual people's lives, as you said, Julia.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say one common thread in conversations about crime, whether it's, national Republicans talking about D.C. or, at the local level in D.C. and other parts of the area, is like so much of crime perceptions are about vibes, right? Even if crime rates are lower than they have been in decades, you probably can find people on the street in D.C. who feel like things are less safe. And that can drive the conversation about crime to a huge extent, right? Just the perception, the vibes that there is more crime.
Yeah, I actually think that there should be room for that conversation. Like, even though this kind of crime is trending downward, people don't feel safe on the street. That's a real thing. I don't want to act like that's not a real thing. The sense of safety that people have when they're out on the street is a real thing. But we have to find a way to talk about it that is based in the actual facts of what's happening, but also honors the way people feel, because that's also true. That's also valid.
And that's part of the solution too, right? Is not just solving crime, but also making people feel safe. Like you also want a vibe shift. as part of your crime fighting policy.
I want to know who's in charge of like the DC's crime-related vibe check.
Crime-related vibe check. Oh my God. So speaking of like vibe checks generally, to segue this. So my former rep, Jamie Raskin, who is the number 2 guy on this panel after James Comer, he went in and basically said this whole thing was a sham. This is what he had to say.
This hearing, called to malign the people of D.C. and their leaders for criminal violence that our colleagues will do nothing to stop, should instead be a hearing to examine and move statehood for the people of Washington, D.C. in the 118th Congress.
So he is like all on board for just outright statehood. Obviously, the goal is to like malign people and have this hearing just be like for show and for theater. But like, do you guys think we're going to see more of this come up as this progresses? Like, is every bill that comes through DC Council going to be negotiated in this way because of DC just being a really easy target and being a punching bag in the way it is?
I think yes. I think until DC has statehood, I think we can expect to see this enjoy this kind of posturing for years to come.
Yay. Love that for us.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. As we know, it's cherry blossom season. And this past weekend, boy, did I find that out. So there were reports of people being stuck in traffic for hours trying to see the cherry blossoms. I was one of them. I wasn't trying to see the cherry blossoms. I was driving to Fredericksburg, Virginia to have lunch with my parents. And just getting out of the city took me 2 hours. At one point, I kind of not seriously, but jokingly thought about abandoning my car. And then I found out that some people actually did abandon their cars while stuck in traffic. Julia, you were stuck in it too, right?
So I was going to the Washington Spirit home opener, which they won, so go Spirits. The game was at 4 p.m. They were having a little like cherry blossom gear, like splurge thing. And I was like, oh, like my friend says she wants to be there at like 3:15. Like if I leave at 2:30, like we should be all good. Oh no. No. I left at 2:30. I did not get to the game until like 4:30, 4:25 with parking. Everywhere was shut down. People had abandoned their cars on 395. Like there's a whole lane. I think it's like the 1C exit to get to the GW Parkway. People had just parked their cars across that area, which is like the bridge that goes over the river. And I was like, guys, what are we doing here? Come on.
Do you know how bad traffic has to be to just abandon your car to be like, I'll figure it out later?
This wasn't even abandoning. People like legitimately parked their cars in traffic because they were like, you know what? Like we can just like walk from this bridge. It's a highway in the middle of a city. Maybe don't do that. Like
that's wild.
I get it, but please don't.
Metro did have its highest Sunday on record since 2015, but it sounds like a lot of folks were still getting into their cars and driving to see the cherry blossoms, which is one of the reasons why the traffic was so bad. According to the U.S. Park Police, temporary closure of 2 parking lots near the tidal basin also contributed to the horrible traffic issues. It was. I have really never seen traffic quite like this. Like, I guess, it. On the one hand, it makes me feel like, oh, DC is back. Like people are really coming out and, going to see those blossoms. But it wasn't very pleasant to be in, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I wonder how much, to go back to vibes, right? I think a lot of people may not feel comfortable going back to Metro yet, and this has been an ongoing conversation, whether because of maybe lingering fears about COVID or, they may have ridden it last year when trains were coming way less frequently and may have been put off by that. Service has improved dramatically over the past few months as it's been coming back, but if people don't realize they're going to take their cars downtown anyway. And with the yellow line closed, there are lots of people who might have taken Metro to see the cherry blossoms and they couldn't.
In terms of vibes, like Sunday was like the perfect DC vibes day. Peak bloom, 65 to 70 degrees, sunny. After everything DC had gone through in terms of like it was rainy and they didn't know when peak bloom was going to happen and it got pushed back to that date because like global warming potentially, but also because DC had a really warm winter. This was like the perfect collision of vibes to just be like, everyone lost their minds. Everyone wanted to be outside. Everyone wanted to be at the tidal basin. And even if Metro like could have handled it, I don't know that Metro was ready for like the one nice day per year in the spring that we got.
Oh yeah, there's a muscle memory too, right? How do we handle these big crowds that there haven't been as many big crowds for a couple years?
Yeah. I would say this weekend, prepare yourselves again for the same vibes, as Dan would like to say. The Cherry Blossom 10K is this weekend. So if you are a person who wants to be downtown and wants to see the cherry blossoms and wants to see the 10K, there will be road closures. There will likely be bus rerouting. Please don't park your car on 395 in an exit lane. For all of our sanity, please look at a map and please find a good way to get downtown and enjoy the springtime vibes instead of causing traffic for literally everyone on planet Earth.
Well, at least people running take up less space on the same number of cars, right?
Oh, that's a good point.
Maybe.
Juliet, do you think those folks who left their cars got towed?
No, they extremely did not. No, listen, I think people know that they can get away with it because maybe it's because of the parking lot being shut down. I don't know. But at a certain point, you got to just be all right. Even police, I think, had issues getting through the traffic. It was that bad. So I think, no, it's not happening. I am not optimistic.
Well, we can talk about another kind of mysterious swarm surprise that happened in DC this week, which is that on Monday, a number of folks, myself included, stepped out of their homes to discover the lingering smell of smoke, which was a big mystery for the first chunk of Monday. And it turned out to be coming from wildfires in northeastern North Carolina that wafted all the way up here. Did you smell the smoke on Monday?
I smelled the smoke on Monday. I was sitting on my back deck, and I thought my neighbors, I was like, what are they doing up there? Are they smoking cigars? No, it was wildfire smoke.
Yeah. My next door neighbor is a food pantry, and 2 years ago they had a big fire, and for a week I would step out of my house and smell just burning plastic, and that was the first thing I thought, oh no, the food pantry's on fire again. And so I looked and there was in fact no fire. And then I drove to Target in Georgia Avenue and Eastern Avenue, and there was smoke there, and I looked online and people in different neighborhoods, Petworth, Deanwood, Rockville even, were saying they smelled the smoke too. It was one of those weird everyone experiences it at once moments, regionally, which are kind of fun. And it's also a reminder of the magic of the atmosphere, right? I don't know if you remember after Joe Biden's inauguration in January of 21, they had fireworks. Mm-hmm. And that people as far out as Olney in Maryland, which is 20 miles outside of DC, could see and hear them. Their houses shook. My house shook. And it was because sound travels farther when the air is cold. Likewise, in this case, there were, as Capitol Weather Gang explains, low-level winds that have been blowing from North Carolina towards the D.C. area at a pretty high speed, 20 to 45 miles an hour, since early Monday, just hustling all those smoke up here. And then warmer air was rising and there was cooler air trapped near the ground. So when the smoke arrived, it just stayed. And actually, there were a number of students at an elementary school in Alexandria who they had to call fire and rescue services out because kids said they were feeling sick.
Wow.
So I am one of the rare people here. I did not smell the smoke because my allergies have been so bad that I can't keep the windows open because of fear of oh my God, the pollen will just attack. So I didn't know that this was a thing until I saw the news. Has something like this happened before?
Yeah, maybe on a smaller scale than this, when there are wildfires anywhere else in the country, because the jet stream generally goes as west to east, we will get smoke from California wildfires eventually, usually a week later. And other kinds of things in the air too. After the nuclear power plant disaster in Japan in 2011, some of the radiation from that came here a week later, although at a much, much lower and safer level. But it's just a reminder that everything is connected.
DC is my favorite place to experience that kind of collective event. If you go on Twitter, whenever something weird is happening with the weather or there's a weird, aircraft in the air over DC, people on Twitter are going to be what is going on? They will be talking about it. It's one of my favorite cities to experience some sort of collective event because we always have a lot to say about it.
People are on it, man. People are on it.
Well, before we all head out, let's do our DC life hack. So, Julia, if folks want to watch these hearings that we were talking about earlier, how can they do that?
Everyone, C-SPAN. Go to their website. They have the entire schedule of like every single hearing that you could want under the sun. If you want to watch it on like YouTube, GOP Oversight is the YouTube channel that you want to go to because the GOP maintains control over the Oversight Committee right now. So yeah, if you want to watch the hearings, they are available. If you want to get your blood pressure up during the spring, that's the way to go.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. Julia, Karen, Dan Reed, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Bridget.
Our lead producer is Priyanka Tilve. Our producer is Julia Karen. Our newsletter writer is Kayla Cody Stemmerman. And our hosts are Michael Schaefer and me, Bridget Todd. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you've enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back Monday morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.
Guys, the pollen is on steroids. And
it's really bad this week.
I love it here, but every year it's like the amount of Zyrtec I have to take just exponentially increases.